Vampire King sees human waitress feeding a weak, mute baby vampire. Realizes it's his cursed son. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In a small, dimly lit diner tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, lived a girl named Clara. She worked as a waitress, barely scraping by, doing whatever it took to make ends meet. Her life was simple, filled with the routine of serving food to a variety of customers, many of whom never took notice of her. The diner was a far cry from the glamorous life she had once dreamed of, but it was enough to keep her grandmother and herself afloat. Clara had grown accustomed to the humdrum of the everyday, and she didn't expect anything more until one rainy night. The storm outside had turned the streets into a murky mess, and Clara's shift was coming to an end when a strange figure walked in. His tall, imposing frame stood out among the ordinary customers. Dressed in an expensive dark coat, his face hidden beneath the shadows of his hood, he was unlike anyone Clara had ever seen. His presence commanded attention, and even the air seemed to grow colder as he entered. Clara barely spared him a glance, focusing instead on the mundane task of wiping down the tables. But then, she saw something that made her freeze. In his arms was a small child, barely 3 or 4 years old. The child was thin, frail, and silent, his large, golden eyes wide but lifeless. Clara's heart ached at the sight. She had seen many children in the diner, but none like this. The boy's pale skin, almost translucent, gave him an ethereal quality that made him seem otherworldly. The man set the child down at the table and took a seat across from him. Clara's curiosity got the better of her. She approached them cautiously, unsure of how to interact with such a strange pair. As she stepped closer, she noticed something even more unsettling. The boy was mute. He didn't speak a word, not even a cry, as his small hands reached weakly for a glass of water. Clara hesitated, unsure whether she should intervene or just go about her duties. But something deep within her stirred, urging her to do something. Without thinking, she knelt beside the boy, offering him a plate of food from the kitchen. She gently placed it in front of him, hoping to comfort him, but also to ease her own sense of helplessness. As she watched the child struggle to pick up the food, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of empathy. The boy's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of something familiar, something that seemed to stir in her own soul. Just then, the man at the table, who had been watching her quietly, stood up. His presence was sudden and commanding, and Clara couldn't help but feel a rush of nervous energy as his eyes locked onto her. His gaze was sharp, cold, yet there was something in it that made her heart race. Clara was about to speak, but he beat her to it. "You're helping him," he said, his voice low but steady. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. "He doesn't speak," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I thought he might be hungry." The man's gaze softened, his eyes flickering with something akin to surprise, or perhaps relief. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You're different," he murmured, more to himself than to her. But before Clara could respond, the child, who had been quietly eating, suddenly looked up at her, his golden eyes shining with recognition. Clara froze. There was something in those eyes, something that made her feel as though she knew him, though she had never seen him before. The moment was brief, fleeting, but in that instant, Clara felt a connection. A bond, unspoken, but undeniable. The man looked at the boy, then back at Clara, and for the first time since he had entered the diner, his expression softened. "He's mine," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "My cursed son." Clara's mind raced, but before she could ask any questions, the man turned, his gaze never leaving her. "You've awakened him. Do you know what that means?" Clara's heart skipped a beat as the weight of his words sank in. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change her life, and the fate of the vampire world, forever. Clara stood there, frozen in place, as the words of the man who had just revealed himself as the Vampire King echoed in her mind. "He's mine. My cursed son." She didn't fully understand what he meant by that, but the weight of the statement hung heavy in the air. The boy, who had been so frail just moments ago, now seemed to stir with a strange energy, as if something had awoken within him. Clara's heart raced, and a surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change forever. The Vampire King's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to Clara, his presence overwhelming. There was something ancient about him, something otherworldly. His eyes, sharp and intense, held a mixture of emotions that she couldn't quite place. He wasn't like any man she had ever met. "You've awakened him," he said again, his voice quiet but firm. Clara's mind raced, trying to process everything. "I don't understand," she whispered, still reeling from the shock of the moment. The man took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "My son has been cursed. He has been in a deep, magical slumber for 50 years, unable to speak, unable to wake. I have searched for a way to break the curse, but nothing worked, until now." His eyes flickered toward the boy, who was now sitting up in his seat, his golden eyes locking with Clara's. "You," the Vampire King continued, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "You are the one who brought him back. And now, you must come with us. You are the key to breaking the curse completely." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? How can I be the key?" She was struggling to make sense of his words. "You have a connection to him," the Vampire King said, his gaze unwavering. "Something in you stirred when you touched him. That touch gave him life, and now you must stay with him. Only then will the curse be fully broken." Clara looked at the boy, her heart filled with compassion. He was still so weak, but there was something in his eyes that spoke to her. She had never been a believer in magic or curses, but something deep inside her told her that what the Vampire King was saying was true. The boy needed her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed him, too. "I don't know what's going on," Clara said softly, almost to herself. "But I'll help him." The Vampire King nodded, his expression softening for the first time. "Good. I will take you to the castle. There, we will work to break the curse once and for all." Clara felt a sense of trepidation settle over her, but she also felt something else, a sense of purpose, as if this was something she was meant to do. Without another word, the Vampire King turned, gesturing for Clara to follow him. She glanced back at the diner, where the other customers were still oblivious to the strange turn of events that had just unfolded. She had no idea what awaited her, but something inside her told her that her life would never be the same again. As they left the diner, the rain had stopped, and the streets were eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps on the wet pavement. Clara walked alongside the Vampire King, the weight of the unknown heavy on her shoulders. The boy, still silent, clung to his side. She couldn't help but wonder what the future held for all of them. When they reached the castle, Clara couldn't help but marvel at its sheer size and grandeur. The tall, Gothic spires rose into the dark sky, and the massive stone walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The Vampire King led her through the massive iron gates, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had entered a world far beyond anything she had ever imagined. As they walked through the grand halls of the castle, Clara couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the stone floor. Everything about the place felt cold, ancient, and powerful. "This is where you will stay," the Vampire King said, his voice low. "The boy will be safe here, and you will help him." Clara nodded, though her mind was still reeling. She didn't know what was expected of her, but she knew that she had a responsibility now. She was bound to this cursed child, and to the Vampire King in ways she couldn't yet understand. As they entered a large room, Clara was struck by the opulence of the surroundings. The bed was massive, draped with luxurious velvet curtains, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and ancient magic. The boy climbed onto the bed and curled up, his golden eyes never leaving Clara's. The Vampire King stood by the door, watching them both. "You will stay here with him," he said quietly, "and you will help him break the curse. If you do, we will all be free of this burden. But if you fail," his voice trailed off, and Clara couldn't help but shiver at the weight of his unspoken words. She nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her new reality. The fate of the boy, the Vampire King, and herself now rested on her shoulders. and she didn't know if she was strong enough to carry it. Clara stood by the window, her gaze lost in the distance as she watched the night sky darken over the vast, ancient castle. She could hear the wind howling outside, its cold breath rattling the old windows. Inside, the room was warm, with flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. The boy, who had been silent for so long, lay curled up on the bed, his golden eyes watching Clara intently. It had been 3 days since she had arrived at the castle, and she still couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was too strange, too otherworldly. The vampire king, who had initially been distant and cold, had gradually begun to open up, though only slightly. He had given her a place to stay, and every day he would visit, watching her care for his son with a kind of quiet, guarded interest. It was clear that the boy was his, and Clara couldn't help but wonder about the curse that bound them together. The boy, though still frail, seemed to be responding to Clara's presence. Every day, he grew stronger, his breathing deeper, his gaze more focused. But despite the small improvements, he never spoke. He was still mute, as he had been for 50 years. Clara's heart ached for him. He was just a child, trapped in a body that couldn't speak or move as it should. And yet, there was something deeply comforting about his presence. There was an unspoken bond between them, something Clara couldn't explain but felt in the depths of her soul. It was as though they had been brought together for a reason, and no matter how confusing or dangerous this journey might be, she couldn't turn away. On the 3rd night, the vampire king visited her again. This time, he didn't stand by the door as usual. Instead, he approached her with slow, deliberate steps. Clara turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You're doing well with him," the vampire king said, his voice low but filled with something akin to approval. Clara nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know what's happening here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying. I really am." The vampire king studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes piercing through her. "You're the only one who has ever been able to help him," he said softly. "I've watched 1,000 doctors, witches, and sorcerers fail. But you're different." Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. "But I don't understand. Why me? I'm just a waitress. A nobody." The vampire king's gaze softened, and for the first time, Clara saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "Sometimes, fate works in mysterious ways," he said quietly. "I believe you were meant to find him. There's something about you, something in your blood, that calls to him." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, but in that moment, the weight of the vampire king's words settled heavily on her shoulders. "What happens if I can't help him?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What if I fail?" The vampire king stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You won't fail," he said firmly. "I won't let you. You are the only one who can break this curse." Clara wasn't sure what to make of his confidence, but something inside her told her that he believed every word he said. It was then that the boy stirred. Clara turned toward him, her heart leaping in her chest as she saw his eyes flutter open. His golden eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of recognition in them. He reached out a small hand toward her, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. The boy was finally awake. But as she moved to approach him, the vampire king's voice stopped her. "Be careful," he warned, his tone serious. "He's still fragile. The curse is not broken yet." Clara nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of the boy being in so much pain for so long. She took a tentative step toward him, her hands trembling slightly. The boy's eyes never left hers as she reached out to touch his small hand. It was cold, but there was a warmth in it that seemed to seep into her very soul. She knelt beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. The boy blinked at her, his golden eyes flickering with something close to emotion. And for the briefest moment, Clara thought she saw a small smile tug at the corners of his lips. "Can you hear me?" she asked softly, her voice filled with hope. The boy didn't answer, but his grip tightened on her hand, and Clara couldn't help but smile. It was the first real connection she had felt with him. He was still trapped in his silence, but she knew in that moment that they were making progress. The curse wasn't broken yet, but there was hope, and that was enough for now. The vampire king watched them in silence, his face unreadable. Clara could feel his gaze on her, but she didn't turn to look at him. For the first time since she had arrived at the castle, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges she couldn't yet foresee. But Clara was ready. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. And no matter what the Vampire King or anyone else said, she knew she had to see this through. She had to help the boy. She had to break the curse. Clara sat by the boy's side, her heart racing as she watched him sleep. His golden eyes, though closed, seemed to glow faintly under his pale eyelids. The curse was still there, lingering in the shadows, but every day, he seemed to grow a little stronger. His breathing had steadied, and for the first time in 50 years, his chest rose and fell like a normal child's. Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had done something. She had awakened him. But the Vampire King had warned her. This was only the beginning. The curse was not so easily broken. Clara was still unsure of her role in all of this. She was just a simple waitress, a girl with no magical powers or royal blood. How had she become the key to breaking a curse that had lasted for centuries? The more she thought about it, the more confusing it became. And the more questions filled her mind, the more she realized that the answers might be more dangerous than she could imagine. As the days passed, the Vampire King continued his visits, his presence always commanding. He never lingered for long, but Clara could feel the weight of his gaze on her whenever he was near. There was a tension between them, something unspoken, but always present. She wasn't sure if it was his distrust or his fear of the curse that made him keep his distance, but Clara knew it wasn't just the boy's well-being he was concerned about. The Vampire King's eyes, sharp and calculating, always seemed to be studying her, searching for something. She wasn't sure what he was looking for, but it made her uncomfortable. One night, after a long day of caring for the boy, Clara was summoned to meet the Vampire King in the castle's grand hall. She had been expecting this. He had been distant, but the time had come for him to address the situation more directly. Clara walked through the corridors, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls, her nerves a knot in her stomach. She arrived at the grand hall, a vast room filled with ancient tapestries and towering, ornately carved pillars. The Vampire King stood by a large, open window, his gaze distant as he stared out at the moonlit night. He didn't turn as she approached, but she could feel his attention on her. "You've been taking good care of him," he said, his voice low but filled with an unreadable intensity. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'm just doing what I can," she replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that churned within her. The Vampire King finally turned to face her, his amber eyes flickering with something that almost seemed like gratitude. But it was quickly replaced by something darker. "You must understand," he began, his tone more serious than ever, "that breaking the curse is not just about helping him. It is about breaking a cycle, one that has been going on for far too long." Clara's brow furrowed. "A cycle?" she repeated. The Vampire King nodded, his gaze intense. "The curse that binds him is ancient, tied to a blood pact made long ago. It is not just a spell. It is a bond that has kept him in this state for 50 years, a bond that cannot be broken by just anyone." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked. The Vampire King's eyes darkened as he spoke. "The curse is bound by more than magic. It is bound by blood, by power, and by something more dangerous. You have awakened him, but you have also awakened the curse in its entirety. The magic is more volatile now. If we do not break it soon, it will consume him entirely." Clara's heart raced. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Vampire King took a step closer, his expression softening, though there was still an edge of urgency in his words. "You must stay with him," he said, "stay by his side. He needs your presence to fully awaken. But you must also understand that your role is more than just a caretaker. You are the key to breaking the curse, not just for him, but for me as well." Clara blinked in confusion. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "How am I the key? I'm just a girl, a waitress. I don't have any powers." The Vampire King's gaze softened, and he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have something far more important than power, Clara," he said quietly. "You have the ability to love. And that, more than anything, is what he needs." Clara felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She had no idea what to say. She had never thought of herself as someone with special abilities, But the way the vampire king looked at her made her feel as if she were part of something far larger than herself. She had always thought of her life as small and insignificant, but now she was beginning to realize that she might be part of a much bigger story. "But how can I help?" Clara asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. The vampire king's gaze was unwavering. "You must continue to care for him," he said, his tone firm. "You must stay by his side, and together you will break the curse. But be warned, this will not be easy. The curse will fight back. It will try to keep him in its grip. And if you're not careful, it could pull you in as well." Clara nodded, though a wave of fear swept over her. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she had to help the boy. She had to break the curse. For him, for the vampire king, and for herself. As she stood there, in the presence of the vampire king, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the journey ahead would be far more dangerous than anything she had ever faced before. The fate of the boy, the vampire king, and even herself rested in her hands. And she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. Clara had never imagined that her life would lead her to a place like this. Days had passed since the vampire king had revealed the true depth of the curse that bound his son. She had never expected to be part of a world so dark and ancient, yet here she was, tied to a fate she didn't fully understand. As she sat beside the boy, his golden eyes locked onto hers, Clara could feel the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her shoulders. The boy was growing stronger each day, his body healing, but there was still so much more to be done. The curse was far from broken, and every step they took toward its destruction seemed to awaken something darker. The vampire king had warned her. The curse would fight back. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night was silent, save for the soft rustle of the castle's ancient stone walls and the occasional howl of the wind outside. Clara felt a chill in the air, though. The room was warm, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. It was during these quiet moments that the true gravity of the situation began to sink in. Clara had always been an ordinary girl. She had never asked for any of this. She had never wanted to be caught up in something so dangerous, so filled with uncertainty. And yet, here she was, sitting in a castle, caring for a cursed child, with a vampire king watching her every move. But despite her fears, Clara couldn't deny the bond that had formed between her and the boy. Every day, she watched him grow a little stronger, a little more alive. She could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes when he looked at her, and she couldn't help but feel that somehow, she was meant to be here, meant to help him. The vampire king had told her that love was the key, that it was her ability to care that would break the curse. But it was more than that. It was her presence. The boy needed her, just as much as she needed him. They were connected, bound together by something neither of them fully understood. And Clara had no intention of backing down. One evening, as Clara sat by the boy's side, brushing a strand of his dark hair away from his forehead, the vampire king entered the room. His presence was commanding, as always, but there was something different in his gaze this time. He studied Clara closely, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something hidden beneath her calm exterior. "You've been taking good care of him," the vampire king said, his voice low. "But there's more you need to know." Clara looked up at him, her heart racing. She had been waiting for him to explain more, to tell her what to do next. "What is it?" she asked softly. The vampire king stepped forward, his expression hardening. "The curse is not just a spell. It's a trap that has been set for centuries. And if we are not careful, it will consume us all." Clara's throat tightened as she processed his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The curse was not created by chance," the vampire king continued. "It was cast by someone with great power, someone who wanted to control not just my son, but the entire vampire kingdom. This curse was meant to keep my bloodline weak, to keep us from rising to full power." Clara felt a wave of unease wash over her. "And now the curse is waking up?" she asked. The vampire king nodded slowly. "Yes, it has been dormant for decades, but with your arrival, with your touch, it has been stirred. The more you care for him, the stronger the curse becomes. It will try to use your emotions against you, to turn your love into a weapon." Clara's mind was spinning. She had no idea that her connection with the boy could be so dangerous. She had been helping him because it felt right, because he needed her. But now, it seemed that everything she did only brought them closer to the edge of something much darker. "What can we do?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes were filled with a deep sorrow. "We must break the curse," he said. "But it is not enough to simply care for him. You must understand the magic that binds us. You must find the source of the curse and destroy it." Clara stood, her body trembling. "How do I do that? How can I break a curse I don't even understand?" The Vampire King's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "You will learn. You must. The curse was built on lies, on power, on manipulation. But love, true love, can break it. And you have the power to do that. But you must also be prepared. The curse will fight back with everything it has. It will twist your feelings, make you doubt yourself, make you question your worth." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered. "Yes, you are," the Vampire King said firmly. "You've already shown that you are stronger than you think. You've already awakened him. Now, you must finish what you started." Clara nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. She had no idea how to break this curse, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stop now. Not when the boy, her son, in a way, needed her. Not when the fate of the Vampire King's bloodline rested in her hands. She would break the curse. She had to. Clara sat quietly beside the boy, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of his hand, feeling the faint warmth that had begun to return to his skin. It had been days since the Vampire King had told her that the curse would fight back with everything it had. Each passing moment, Clara could sense the increasing tension in the air, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The boy's golden eyes, now more focused than before, flickered with a faint sense of recognition whenever Clara spoke to him. But the curse was not broken yet. His silence, the one thing that had kept him trapped for 50 long years, still held a tight grip on him. Clara was certain that whatever force had created this curse, it wasn't just magical. It was a powerful force that thrived on control and manipulation. The Vampire King's words haunted her. Love can break it. But be prepared. It will try to twist your feelings and break your resolve. She had no idea what that meant, but she felt it in the pit of her stomach every time she looked at the boy. The longer she stayed by his side, the more she realized the true danger of the curse. It wasn't just the boy's life at risk anymore, it was hers too. Clara's world had shifted completely since she first stepped into the castle. Everything had changed. The Vampire King had not only entrusted her with his son's life, but also given her the weight of a kingdom's future. She had been thrust into a story far bigger than herself, and despite the fear, a part of her couldn't help but feel a deep sense of purpose. One night, after she had finished feeding the boy, she was summoned once again by the Vampire King. Her heart skipped a beat as she made her way through the grand hallways of the castle, the stone floors cold beneath her feet. She had grown used to the dark, cold grandeur of the place, but it still made her feel small, like an outsider. She had always been a simple waitress, used to a life of uncertainty and quiet struggle. But now, she was standing at the heart of a world she had never imagined. As she entered the Vampire King's study, she found him standing by the window, looking out into the night. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. The usual coldness was there, but something more, something heavy, lingered in his eyes. He turned slowly when Clara entered. "Clara," he began, his voice more strained than usual, "you've done well with him. But now we face the real challenge." Clara's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" she asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. The Vampire King stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "The curse is not only tied to him. It's tied to me too. It always has been. I've spent centuries trying to undo it, but now I realize that breaking it will require a sacrifice. A sacrifice I didn't expect." Clara's stomach clenched at his words. "What kind of sacrifice?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Clara saw something in them. Something that hinted at a past filled with pain and regret. "The curse was placed on my bloodline long ago. It is not just a spell, it is a binding. To break it, we must confront the one who cast it. The one who has controlled us all this time." Clara's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Who did this? Who cursed your bloodline?" The Vampire King's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he was silent, lost in his thoughts. "My own father," he said, his voice almost a growl. He was the one who bound our family in this curse. He sought to control everything, to keep our bloodline in chains, to ensure that no one could rise against him. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The Vampire King's father, his own flesh and blood, was the one who had created this nightmare. And now, the curse was coming full circle. Clara could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, determined to understand her part in this. The Vampire King looked at her, his gaze hard but filled with an emotion she couldn't place. "You are the only one who can break this," he said quietly. "But you must face the source of the curse. You must confront my father, who still lives, hidden away in the deepest part of the castle. He has kept himself alive for centuries, feeding off the very magic he bound us with. Only by destroying him will the curse truly be broken." Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had come this far, and now, the final challenge was before her. But she didn't feel ready. How could she be? She was just a girl, with no powers, no experience, facing an ancient vampire king who had lived for centuries. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. The Vampire King stepped closer, his presence looming. "You have to," he said softly. "The boy needs you. I need you. This is the only way." Clara's mind was spinning. The stakes had never been higher, and now, the burden of breaking the curse rested on her shoulders. She had no choice but to face the source of the curse, no matter how terrifying or impossible it seemed. "I'll do it," Clara said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'll help you." The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Clara saw the man beneath the king, vulnerable, desperate, and willing to do whatever it took to save his son and break free from the chains of his past. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. "But be careful. The deeper you go, the more the curse will try to take you." Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stop now. Not when everything she had worked for was on the line. Not when the boy needed her. She was ready to face the darkness. Clara's heart was racing as she followed the Vampire King down the winding stone corridors of the castle. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and every step she took felt like she was descending deeper into an unknown world. The boy, still weak, had been left behind in his chambers, his golden eyes watching Clara go with a look of quiet trust that she could never fully comprehend. He needed her, and now, it was time to face the source of the curse. The Vampire King led her through halls that seemed to stretch on forever, their grandeur almost suffocating. Massive portraits of long-dead ancestors stared down at her as they passed, their eyes cold and distant. The further they went, the colder the air grew. It was as if they were descending into the very heart of the castle, where ancient magic lingered in every corner. "Are you sure about this?" the Vampire King asked, his voice low, as if to test her resolve. Clara nodded, her grip tightening on the sword that had been entrusted to her for this task. It was nothing more than a simple weapon, but the Vampire King insisted it was necessary to face what lay ahead. "I have to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For him. For you." The Vampire King didn't respond, but his eyes flickered with something that could have been gratitude, or perhaps something more complex, something buried deep beneath the layers of centuries-old royalty. They reached a large wooden door at the end of the corridor. It was intricately carved with symbols and runes, the kind Clara had never seen before. The Vampire King placed his hand on the door, and the runes began to glow faintly, reacting to his touch. The door creaked open, revealing a darkened chamber beyond. A cold, unnatural chill permeated the room, and Clara could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her as soon as she stepped inside. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The room was vast, with high ceilings that seemed to stretch into an abyss. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but they were empty, except for one. In the far corner of the room stood a single, large book on a pedestal, its pages yellowed with age. It was open, as if waiting for someone to read its dark contents. "This is where it all began," the Vampire King said quietly, his voice filled with reverence and something darker. "The curse was written in that book. It binds my bloodline. It traps my son and me in a cycle of suffering." Clara's eyes locked onto the book, her stomach turning at the thought of its power. She had no idea what she was about to face, but one thing was certain. The curse had to be broken. How do I destroy it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. The Vampire King's gaze hardened. You must read it. The book holds the key, but it is not so simple. The curse will fight back. It will try to twist your mind, make you question your every decision. But you must stay strong. You must not give in to its power. Clara nodded, her hand gripping the sword tightly. She wasn't sure if it would help her against the curse, but it was the only thing she had. She stepped closer to the pedestal, feeling the weight of the book's dark magic. She had to do this. For the boy. For the Vampire King. For herself. She took a deep breath, then reached out and opened the book. As her fingers touched the pages, a cold, swirling darkness filled the air around her. The words on the pages seemed to twist and shift, the ink bleeding into dark, indecipherable shapes. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing, as whispers filled her ears, voices from the past, voices filled with pain and longing. You are the key, the whispers said, echoing in the chamber. But can you bear the weight of it all? Can you truly destroy what was never meant to be undone? Clara's vision blurred as the words seemed to swim in front of her eyes. She felt the weight of the curse pressing down on her, the darkness wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. She was the only one who could break it. With trembling hands, Clara began to read aloud the words on the page. The air grew colder with each syllable, the whispers growing louder, urging her to stop, to give in. But Clara pressed on, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. The room seemed to close in around her, the darkness swirling like a storm, but Clara's focus never wavered. She had to finish. She had to destroy the curse. As she spoke the final words, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. The book began to disintegrate in her hands, its dark magic unraveling before her eyes. She felt a sharp, searing pain in her chest, as if the curse was trying to drag her into the abyss with it. But Clara fought it. She pushed through the pain, her grip on the sword tightening. With one final, desperate cry, she tore the book apart. The light exploded in a blinding flash, and then everything went still. Clara collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The pain in her chest slowly faded, and the oppressive darkness that had filled the room seemed to lift. She looked up, her eyes wide, as she realized the curse was broken. The boy, the Vampire King, they were free. The room was silent now, the air no longer heavy with the weight of the curse. Clara had done it. She had broken the cycle. But she knew the journey was far from over. The Vampire King stood behind her, his gaze intense as he watched her. You've done it, he said, his voice filled with awe. Clara nodded, her heart still pounding. We're not done yet, are we? She asked softly. The Vampire King's expression darkened. No, but you've taken the first step. Now, we must face what comes next. Together. The air in the chamber was thick with the aftermath of what Clara had done. She could still feel the pulsing energy of the broken curse lingering around her, like the remnants of a storm. The book had dissolved into nothingness, its dark magic shattered, and with it, the chains that had bound the boy and the Vampire King. She had done it. The curse was broken. Yet, Clara knew this was not the end. She could feel it in the depths of her bones. The weight of what was to come still hung in the air, like a distant thunderstorm waiting to strike. The Vampire King stood a few steps away, watching her with an unreadable expression. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, the weight of centuries-old power and sorrow in his amber eyes. For a moment, they both stood there in silence, the echoes of the broken curse still reverberating through the room. Clara's chest felt tight, her breath shallow, and yet a strange sense of relief washed over her. The boy, now free from the curse, was no longer trapped in the silence that had bound him for so long. But what came next? What would happen to them all? The Vampire King spoke first, his voice breaking the stillness. You've done it. The curse is broken. His words were soft but heavy, filled with awe and something else, something deep within him. Clara turned to face him, her heart racing. But it's not over, is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer to her. No, he said quietly. The curse is gone, but its consequences remain. We are free, yes, but there are forces at play here that we cannot ignore. Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. What do you mean? The Vampire King's gaze softened, but there was a coldness in his tone. The one who placed the curse on my bloodline, he is not gone. My father, the one who bound us all to this fate, still lives. And he will not let go of his grip so easily. Clara's stomach churned at his words. The Vampire King's father, the one who had created this nightmare, was still out there, alive, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had known the curse was powerful, but she hadn't fully grasped the extent of the darkness it had spawned. What does he want? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Power, the Vampire King replied. Control. My father has spent centuries building a kingdom of darkness, manipulating everyone around him. He seeks to control not just me, but the entire vampire race. And now, with the curse broken, he will come for us. He will not rest until he has what he wants. Clara felt the weight of his words, the gravity of their situation sinking in. She had broken the curse, but now she was faced with something even darker. An enemy who had orchestrated everything. An ancient vampire who would stop at nothing to reclaim his power. What can we do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. The Vampire King's eyes locked onto hers, his expression hardening. We prepare. We fight. We end this, once and for all. Clara nodded, her heart pounding. She had never imagined her life would lead her to this moment, to a battle against an ancient vampire king. But she had no choice now. The boy, her charge, the one she had fought so hard to save, still needed her. The Vampire King, though distant, had become a source of strength for her, and she couldn't turn her back on him now. She would stand with him, fight by his side, and protect the boy. I'm with you, Clara said, her voice firm. We'll stop him. The Vampire King's eyes softened slightly, and for the briefest of moments, Clara saw a flicker of the man he once was. A man who had been forced into a life of power and responsibility, but who now stood at the brink of losing it all. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I've lost so much already, Clara. My son, my bloodline. I will not lose any more. Not if I can help it. Clara's heart ached for him. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried. She knew he wasn't just fighting for power or for his kingdom. He was fighting for his family, for everything that had been taken from him. We'll do this together, Clara said, her voice steady. We'll protect him. We'll protect you. The Vampire King nodded, his gaze shifting toward the door. There's no time to waste. We must leave at once. My father is already plotting his next move, and we cannot afford to be caught off guard. Clara followed him as he turned toward the door, her mind racing with the gravity of what lay ahead. She had broken the curse, but in doing so, she had unleashed something far darker. An ancient vampire king who would stop at nothing to regain his control. She had no idea what awaited them, but she knew one thing for sure. The real fight had just begun. Together, they would face this new enemy, and Clara would do whatever it took to protect the boy, to protect the Vampire King, and to stop the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Clara and the Vampire King moved swiftly through the darkened hallways of the castle, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on them. Every step they took seemed to echo through the ancient stone, and Clara couldn't shake the sense of urgency that had gripped her. The boy, still recovering from the curse that had bound him for so long, remained in the room they had prepared for him. The Vampire King had insisted that Clara stay by his side, but now, with the curse broken, it seemed there was no more time for waiting. They were on the move, and there was no turning back. We have to move fast, the Vampire King said, his voice low and urgent as they made their way through the dark halls. My father will not wait much longer. He knows we've broken the curse. He'll come for us. Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been a fighter. She had never imagined herself in the middle of something so dangerous, so life or death. But now, she had no choice. She had already made her decision. She would stand with the Vampire King, with the boy, and face whatever came their way. How do we stop him? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear that swirled in her stomach. The Vampire King's amber eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. We must take the fight to him, he said, his voice cold. He has hidden himself away in the depths of the castle, in the very heart of the magic that binds our bloodline. We must face him there, where the curse began. Clara's mind raced as they walked. She had no idea what awaited them in the heart of the castle. She had only heard rumors of the ancient vampire king, the one who had created the curse and trapped the vampire king's bloodline for centuries. If what the vampire king said was true, if his father had been waiting for this moment, then their lives were in more danger than Clara had ever imagined. What will happen when we confront him? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The vampire king turned to face her, his eyes softening slightly. He will try to destroy us, he said. He will use every ounce of power he has to keep us under his control. But we must be stronger. We cannot let him win. Clara nodded, her mind still spinning with everything that had happened in the past days. She had come to this castle to care for a cursed boy, but now, she was about to face an ancient vampire king. She had no idea what strength she had within her, but she knew one thing. She couldn't back down. They reached a massive wooden door at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The door was covered in dark, intricate runes, and Clara could feel the weight of the magic that surrounded it. The vampire king stopped in front of it and placed his hand on the door. The runes began to glow faintly, and the door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The air inside was thick with power, and Clara could feel the oppressive presence of the curse that still lingered in the walls. The vampire king stepped forward, his presence commanding and powerful. "This is it," he said softly. "The heart of the curse. My father is inside." Clara followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew that there was no turning back. She had to face this. For the boy. For the vampire king. For herself. They stepped into the chamber, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. The room was vast, with high ceilings and walls covered in dark, ancient tapestries. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, stood a figure cloaked in shadow. The air in the room grew colder, and Clara could feel the darkness emanating from the figure. The vampire king's father stood there, his form shrouded in a cloud of black mist. Clara couldn't see his face, but she could feel his presence. The power that radiated from him was almost overwhelming. "So, you've come." A voice echoed through the chamber, deep and cold. It was the voice of the vampire king's father, and it sent a chill down Clara's spine. "You've broken my curse. You've freed my bloodline. But do you think you can stop me?" The vampire king stepped forward, his voice steady despite the anger that simmered beneath it. "It's over, father," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the air. "Your curse is broken, and you will not control us any longer." The shadowy figure on the platform chuckled darkly, and Clara could feel the coldness of his laugh in her bones. "You fool," he spat. "You think you can break the chains I've forged over centuries? You think you can destroy me?" The vampire king's father stepped forward, his form becoming clearer in the dim light. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow hue, and his pale skin was stretched tight over sharp, bony features. He was ancient, his power palpable, and Clara could see the terrifying resemblance to the vampire king in his eyes. But where the vampire king had warmth and strength, his father was nothing but cold, cruel power. "You are nothing without the curse," the vampire king's father sneered. "You were always meant to serve me, and now, you will return to your rightful place." Clara's heart raced as she looked between the two vampires. She had never seen such raw hatred between a father and son. This was more than a battle for power. It was a fight for freedom, for the very soul of the vampire king's bloodline. The vampire king stepped forward, his posture rigid, his eyes filled with determination. "I will never return to your chains," he said, his voice unwavering. "We are free, and I will destroy you if it's the last thing I do." The battle was about to begin. Clara could feel the weight of the moment. This was their chance to end the curse, to destroy the very source of the darkness that had haunted their lives for centuries. She had to stand with the vampire king. They had to fight together. For the boy, for the future, and for freedom. The chamber crackled with tension as the vampire king and his father faced each other, a battle of wills more than a fight of strength. Clara stood beside the vampire king, her hand gripping the sword he had given her, though she had no idea if it would even be enough. The air around them seemed to pulse with dark energy, the very walls vibrating with the power of the curse that had once held them all in its grip. The vampire king's father, ancient and cruel, stood at the far side of the room, his eyes glowing with malevolent energy. His laughter echoed through the chamber, cold and cutting. You are so naive, my son, the ancient vampire said, his voice as smooth as silk but filled with venom. You believe you can undo what I have done, that you can break the chains I've placed on our bloodline. You have no idea the power you are up against. The vampire king's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. You've controlled us for far too long, he spat, his voice thick with disgust. I'm done serving you. I'm done being your puppet, and I will not let you control my son any longer. Clara could feel the weight of the vampire king's words as they settled over her. He wasn't just fighting for himself or for his son. He was fighting for his freedom, for his bloodline, and for everything he had lost. The old vampire's eyes narrowed, his face twisting with anger. You think you can defeat me? He hissed. I am eternal. My power knows no bounds. You are nothing. Your pathetic efforts are pointless. The air thickened, and Clara felt a surge of dark magic press against her, making her knees tremble. The vampire king stepped forward, his gaze locked on his father, the anger in his eyes turning to determination. I've broken your curse. You are no longer in control of me, he said, his voice steady and commanding. And I will destroy you if that's what it takes to ensure that my bloodline is free. The ancient vampire's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. You think you can destroy me, boy? You have no idea what you're dealing with. You are weaker than you think. He raised his hand, and Clara felt a sharp, cold wind fill the room, swirling around them like a vortex. The ground beneath her feet trembled as if the very foundation of the castle was shaking in response to the ancient vampire's power. Clara's grip tightened on the sword as the room seemed to close in on them. She wasn't sure if she could withstand the dark magic that surrounded them, but she couldn't let the vampire king face this alone. She had to help him. With all the strength she could muster, Clara raised her sword, its blade glinting in the dim light. We can do this, she whispered to the vampire king, her voice filled with determination. We can end this. Together. The vampire king looked at her, his expression softening for the briefest of moments. Then, without another word, he turned his gaze back to his father. Together, he repeated, his voice like steel. The battle had begun. The ancient vampire raised both hands, his eyes glowing with power as he summoned dark energy from the depths of the castle. The air around them thickened, the temperature dropping to a chilling cold. Clara's skin prickled as the magic swirled around her, but she refused to falter. She could feel the vampire king beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. The ancient vampire's laughter filled the room once more, dark and mocking. You think you can defeat me? He taunted. I will crush you, just as I crushed your ancestors. He thrust his hands forward, sending a wave of dark energy toward the vampire king and Clara. The force of it knocked Clara back, but she quickly regained her footing, the sword still in her hand. The vampire king, however, was unharmed. He stood tall, his eyes glowing with the same golden fire that had once been the hallmark of his power. You are nothing, the vampire king said coldly, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. I've spent my life under your shadow, but no more. This ends now. The ancient vampire sneered, his hands crackling with dark power. It's too late for you, he hissed. You've already broken the curse, but you will never defeat me. My magic is too strong. My bloodline is too powerful. Clara could feel the weight of his words, the conviction in his voice. But she refused to let doubt cloud her resolve. She could feel the power of the vampire king beside her, his strength, his determination, and she knew they could do this. The moment of truth had come. It's not about magic, Clara said, her voice clear and strong. It's about breaking the chains. It's about freedom. And you're right. This ends now. With that, she lifted her sword high, its blade shining in the dim light of the chamber. The ancient vampire's eyes widened in disbelief, but before he could react, the vampire king surged forward, his own power blazing like a fire. The clash of their powers was deafening, a violent explosion of dark and light that filled the chamber with a blinding brilliance. Clara's heart raced as she watched the battle unfold before her. She could feel the power of the ancient vampire, the darkness that surrounded him, but she also felt the vampire king's strength, his resolve to protect his bloodline. The ancient vampire stumbled back, his power flickering as the vampire king's golden magic surged toward him. The darkness that had held the castle in its grip for centuries began to crack and break, the ancient magic unraveling before their eyes. With one final surge of power, the Vampire King drove his magic deep into the ancient vampire's heart, shattering the last remnants of his curse. The room fell silent. The air was still, and the ancient vampire, the source of all their suffering, collapsed into dust. Clara stood there, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short gasps. She had never imagined herself capable of facing something so terrifying, but now, it was over. The curse was truly broken. The Vampire King turned to her, his expression unreadable, but she could see the faintest flicker of relief in his eyes. "It's over," he said softly. "We're free." The aftermath of the battle was almost too much for Clara to process. The chamber, once filled with the oppressive power of the curse, now stood in silence. The air, heavy with the echoes of ancient magic, had cleared. It was over. The ancient vampire, the one who had been the source of so much pain and suffering for the Vampire King and his bloodline, had been destroyed. He had crumbled into dust, his power and influence vanishing like smoke in the wind. Clara stood in the center of the chamber, her legs trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had never imagined she would be in a battle like this, never imagined she would face something so powerful, so dark. And yet, here she was, standing in the heart of the castle, a place that had once been ruled by fear and magic, now free. The Vampire King stood beside her, his chest heaving with the exertion of their fight. His amber eyes were soft, but there was something more in them. Relief, yes, but also something deeper, something that spoke of the years of torment he had endured. They had done it. They had freed themselves from the curse. They had ended the reign of the ancient vampire who had controlled them all. But as Clara looked at the Vampire King, she saw something more in his eyes. A question, perhaps, or a realization that had been building since the moment the fight ended. He turned to her, his gaze fixed, and for the first time, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You did it," he said softly. "You broke the curse. You freed us." Clara's heart thudded in her chest. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to thank her, to look at her with such a mix of admiration and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice steady, though she felt a rush of emotion swell within her. "I'm just a waitress. A nobody. You were the one who led us here, who fought for your bloodline, for your son." The Vampire King's expression softened further, and for a moment, he stepped closer to her. "No," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You are not a nobody. You were the key, Clara. You were the one who broke the chains. You are the reason we are free." Clara shook her head, unable to fully comprehend the weight of his words. She had never seen herself as anything more than an ordinary person, someone who had simply wanted to help. But the way he looked at her made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. There was so much more to this story, more than just the curse and the battle. There was the bond between them, the unspoken understanding that had formed over the past weeks, the way their lives had intertwined. "But what happens now?" Clara asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "What do we do now that it's over?" The Vampire King looked away for a moment, his gaze distant, as if he was considering her question carefully. He had spent so long fighting, so long trying to undo the wrongs that had been done to him, to his family. But now, with the curse broken, with his father destroyed, what was left for him? For them? He turned back to Clara, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Now, we rebuild," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We rebuild what was lost. My bloodline, my people, have been scattered, torn apart by this curse. We must restore them, protect them, and ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." Clara nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. This wasn't just about them. It was about the future, about rebuilding everything that had been lost. The Vampire King had been bound by the curse for so long, and now that it was over, he had a chance to reclaim his heritage, to restore his people. But it wouldn't be easy. They would have to face the consequences of everything that had happened, rebuild their strength, and forge a new path forward. "And what about the boy?" Clara asked softly, her gaze drifting to the empty space where he had once stood. The Vampire King's expression softened at the mention of his son. "He is the future," he said quietly. "He is the one who will lead us." but he will need guidance, support. I will not fail him. Clara felt a surge of emotion at his words. The boy had been the reason they were all here, the reason they had fought. And now, he had a future, one that would be shaped by the Vampire King, by Clara, and by the new world they would create together. The Vampire King turned to her once more, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Hope. For the first time, he wasn't just a man burdened by the past. He was looking toward the future. And in that future, there was room for both of them. You're not alone in this, Clara said, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. I'm with you. For as long as it takes. The Vampire King nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Together, he said, his voice strong. We'll rebuild. And we'll ensure that the darkness never returns. Clara stood tall, her resolve hardening as she looked ahead. The battle had been won, but the journey was far from over. They had broken the curse, destroyed the ancient vampire, and freed the boy. Now, they would build something new, something that would last. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future held, side by side. The dawn broke quietly over the castle, casting soft, golden light through the tall windows that stretched across the stone walls. The night's battle had left its mark on everyone, but now, with the ancient vampire defeated and the curse broken, there was a sense of peace, something that had been absent for far too long. Clara sat in the room where the boy had once been, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what had happened. She had helped break the curse, helped free the Vampire King from the chains that had bound his bloodline for centuries. And now, they were free. But freedom came with its own challenges. The Vampire King was standing by the window, looking out at the lands beyond, his face reflecting the thoughts swirling in his mind. Clara could see the weight of centuries in his eyes. He had spent so long living in the shadow of his past, under the burden of his bloodline's curse, that now, with it finally shattered, he had to face the future, a future he wasn't sure how to shape. She stood and walked toward him, her footsteps soft against the cold stone floor. She knew he wasn't just fighting for his freedom anymore. He was fighting for the future of his people, for the boy's future, and for something more than just survival. What comes next? Clara asked quietly, standing beside him. He turned to look at her, his gaze thoughtful. We rebuild, he said, his voice steady. We rebuild everything that has been broken, starting with my people. Clara nodded. She knew what he meant. The Vampire King had spent so much time fighting to break the curse, to free himself from his father's grip, that now, he needed to focus on what was left, on creating a new world for the vampires who had lived in fear for centuries. And the boy? Clara asked, glancing toward the room where he had once been. The Vampire King's expression softened at the mention of his son. He is the future, he said quietly. But he is also young. He needs time to grow, to learn what it means to lead. I will guide him, but he will need support. And that is where you come in, Clara. Clara felt a wave of surprise at his words. Me, she repeated. I'm just a girl. A waitress. I'm not a leader. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom. The Vampire King stepped closer to her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. You've shown more strength than you realize. You've helped break the curse, and you've been there for my son when I couldn't. You are part of this future, and I need you by my side. You will help guide him, just as you helped me. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear those words. She had never seen herself as a leader, as someone who could help shape the future of an entire people. But the Vampire King was right. She had already done more than she could have ever imagined. She had been there for the boy, and now, she couldn't turn her back on him. She couldn't turn her back on the Vampire King. I'll do whatever it takes, Clara said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. I'll help him. I'll help you. The Vampire King nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. I knew you would, he said softly. Together, we can build a future. A future where my people are free. A future where the curse is nothing more than a distant memory. As the day grew brighter, the castle seemed to breathe with new life. The long shadow of the curse had finally lifted, and a new chapter was beginning. Clara and the Vampire King stood side by side, looking out at the future that lay ahead. It would not be easy. There would be challenges, there would be setbacks, but Clara knew that, together, they could overcome anything. They had already defeated the darkness that had plagued them for centuries. Now, they would build something better, something stronger. The boy's future would be bright. And as long as they stood together, so would theirs. Clara knew that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be long. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a girl caught in the middle of something bigger than herself. She was part of something that mattered. And she would fight for it, for the boy, for the vampire king, and for the future they would create together. The sun rose slowly over the castle, its golden light spilling across the land, filling the air with warmth and a sense of renewal. Clara stood by the window of the high tower, watching the world outside. She had spent weeks, months even, trapped in a world that was dark, uncertain, and filled with danger. But now, after everything they had faced, the curse was gone, the ancient vampire destroyed, and the future, for the first time, seemed wide open. She had been through so much, had been caught in a battle far beyond anything she had ever imagined. But now, standing in the light of a new day, she could feel a sense of peace settle over her. The vampire king stood beside her, looking out over the same view, his presence a steady comfort at her side. He had been through centuries of torment, years of living under the shadow of his father's curse. And yet, now, they were free. Free to build a future that was theirs to shape. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, breaking the silence between them. The vampire king nodded, his amber eyes glimmering with something that almost resembled hope. "It is," he said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "For the first time, I can see it. A future without the curse. A future for my people." Clara smiled, turning to look at him. "And for us," she added, her voice steady. The vampire king met her gaze, and for a moment, their eyes locked, understanding passing between them without the need for words. They had fought together. They had broken the chains that had bound them, freed the boy, and restored hope to a world that had long been shrouded in darkness. And now, they would rebuild. Together. The boy, the vampire king's son, was recovering. He was still young, still learning what it meant to be free, to be a part of something bigger than himself. But he was no longer a prisoner of the curse. He was the future. And Clara knew that with the guidance of the vampire king, they would show him the way. They would teach him to lead, to protect, and to rule with wisdom. Clara felt a sense of purpose in that. She wasn't just an observer in this new world. They had a place for her here. She had a role to play in this future. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice filled with quiet curiosity. The vampire king's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now we heal," he said simply. "We rebuild what was lost. We gather the scattered members of my bloodline, unite them, and restore what was torn apart. It will not be easy. There will be challenges, but we will do it, together." Clara nodded, a deep sense of resolve filling her chest. She wasn't afraid anymore. The darkness they had faced had been fierce, but now they had the light of a new beginning. They would face the future with strength, with unity, and with hope. The vampire king's son would one day lead them, but for now, he was still a child, learning the ropes of a world that had been hidden from him for so long. But Clara was confident that, with their guidance, he would grow into a wise and capable ruler. The vampire king, though burdened with his past, would now have a chance to lead his people into a new era, an era free from the curse that had haunted them all. And Clara, though she had once been just a waitress, would now be part of that future. She had found her place, and she had found the strength within herself that she never knew she had. "I'm with you," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "We'll do this. Together." The vampire king nodded, a faint but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Together, he agreed. They stood side by side, looking out over the land, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But it was a road they would walk together, a road that would lead them to a brighter future. And for the first time in a long time, the world seemed full of possibilities. The darkness had been defeated, the curse broken, and now, it was time to rebuild. It was time to move forward. The vampire king, Clara, and the boy were free. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, they knew that the future, whatever it held, would be theirs to shape.